configuration of trusted IPs, right? So whenever we are doing this conditional access, you have an option of choosing a trusted IP address there or choosing a location there, right? So there what you can do is you can go ahead and specify that these are the allowed locations, right? These are the allowed locations. Anything beyond this, do not allow access over here. And these parameters or features that you are mentioning is part of your conditional access policy, right? So you can block access for specific countries or regions. So one of the examples I gave you yesterday, now it is up to you to decide based on your experience as an administrator or based on the feedback given by the users that I was being attacked or my credentials were being compromised and the mail which I am receiving is from this particular location, right? So along with Exchange Server spam settings, you can also block these things from your Active Directory as well. Okay, so like I mentioned yesterday, when it comes to conditional access policy, this is more like a if else conditions. So if this request is coming from here, block it, allow it, or use multi-factor authentication. So those settings for conditional access can be mentioned over here. So if you see the screenshot over here, you have options for IP ranges that you can mention. You have options for selected countries that you want to mention. So all these things are a part of your conditional access configuration. So once you have provided these parameters over here, you just have to go to your conditional access and mention Microsoft allowed resources, Microsoft allowed locations and IP ranges. So it will automatically pick up this value from here. Now, what is this range that you will have to decide? And you will get these values from your user emails that they have received, or on your network firewall, you may have detected where these requests are coming from. Now, if you want to dig deeper into it and do a required hunting of how these what are the IP ranges and where this request is coming from, you can use something called as Azure Sentinel. So in Azure Sentinel, there you can check for what are the threats that you have, what are the risks that you have, right? And you can hunt down the required details by using Azure Sentinel. So yesterday I showed you this option. How do you go ahead and specify the location values? And here if you see, you can check for any location, all trusted locations. So what do you want to allow? What do you want to block? You can check for these members over here.
So Subhash, anything that we create under the name locations, only those things over here, right? Under this locations part, the screen that you're showing.
That's
okay,
right.
So that we have not defined previously will not show up. There's no already inbuilt. There's no inbuilt list of locations or anything like that, right?
No. You'll have to decide that list yourself.
Okay.
That's why it is conditional access policy. The pre-built locations or predefined members, that will be part of your risks that you mentioned earlier, sign-in risk and the user risk as part of identity protection. In conditional access, you will have to specify that.
Okay.
Now, next member over here, generally when we are working with subscription, what we need to do is we need to allow permissions or give permissions to internal users, and at various points in time, we also have to give permissions to the external users as well. So once it comes to external users, when I say external users, what do I mean by that? These are the users who are not part of my domain. Okay, these are the users who are not part of my domain. So those users are referred as guest users. If you recall, while we were discussing about identity, we mentioned about cloud identity, we mentioned about synchronized identity, and the third identity which we mentioned over here was guest identity. So how do you create this guest identity? That is what is referred in this particular module. So in terms of guest identity, here what we have to do is you have to send invitation to a given user. One needs to send an invitation to the external user. When the user will receive it as an email and accept that invitation, right? Now this invitation will be sent as an email. That's the reason why you need to have a valid email account. Along with this, you also have to give permissions when you are adding this guest user. You have to give them permission saying this will be the role which will be played by the user. Correct? So whether they are playing role of a global reader, global administrator, or they have a permissions on a specific resource within Azure platform, right? So what is the role that the user will perform? Billing administrator, or if you want to outsource some of your critical activities to external people, right? So in those scenarios, you will go ahead and add a guest user over here. So if you see the screenshots over here, this is how this entire process happens. So you have to go to your all user section, and instead of adding a new user here, you'll be adding a guest user. While you're doing that, you'll realize a lot of attributes that were there as part of new user are not available here. So like example, the drop down of the uh, domain name, which actually comes when you're creating a new user, is not available when you are creating a guest user, because I don't know what will be the domain of that user. Correct? So whatever is the domain, once the user mentions it over here as part of the email address, the name being mentioned, I will continue with that. Just to show you all an example of this, let me go to Azure Active Directory. Within Azure Active Directory, if I go to the users section, so can you see Guru as a user, but this user has domain as omspandey@hotmail.onmicrosoft.com. This is one of the shared domains that I have right now. Here you'll see the next option, new guest user. Can you see that? There's minimum information over here. Let me add myself. Let me give the email address as, right? So whatever email address you want, whatever message, since the email will be sent, whatever message I want over here, whatever groups I want to make myself part of, what is the role that I want to assign here, application developer, application administrator, usage location, right? Other are optional information. So I can send an invitation over here. This will send the invitation message to the user, right? So once your job is done, once you have added the user, you can add permissions to specific applications. You can add permissions to the Azure resources, virtual machines, or virtual machines or web application, whichever resource you want to give permissions to the user, you can mention it over here. So once the invitation is being sent, the another user will receive this email, and the person has to accept the invitation. So what you are seeing over here is the email content being received by the user. So once we receive the invitation, we'll be able to access the Azure portal, and within Azure portal, I will be able to access only those resources where I have been given permissions, right? As an application administrator or as a resource administrator. So whichever permissions I have been given, I will be able to receive information. I will be able to access those resources over here. So with this, we complete off with module one.
Subhash, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
So, does a guest user always needs an invitation, or can we create it
Yes.
from? Because when we clicked on add guest user, we had two options. One is invite user, another one is create user.
Or
So,
if you recall what we discussed on day one, so I'll repeat myself. There are three type of users: cloud identity, synchronized identity, guest identity. When you click on new user, what you are creating is a cloud identity. Guest identity, you always have to invite user. So you decide what kind of identity you want to create. Does that answer the question?
one more thing. So, when we go to the users and say new guest user, and
Okay.
if invite user, so that brings us the open screen where you need to enter any. There's no option for selecting the domain name here. But if you select create user there, there is an option under the domain name drop down which says the domain name I need don't show here, right at the bottom of the
Mhm.
drop down. So what exactly does that mean? Does it mean that there
Correct.
is an option to add?
That means when you are selecting a domain, you have already added a custom domain. All the members which is added as a custom domain and verified, those domain names will show over there. Remember on
Yes.
day one we discussed about custom domains.
Okay. Yes, but I mean, if we is there any other option? Because right now here it says the domain name I need isn't shown here. So I mean, I was just checking because yeah, whatever we add in that custom domain names shows up in the
Hmm.
drop. So
Correct.
why do we have another link down there that says, so I don't know what it does. I have not clicked on it, but just wanted to know, like, point out, like, what exactly does it do?
Which option are you talking about?
If you
This is
go
on your
back
drop down.
right below that, no, no, no. If you close the drop down,
So I can have more than one custom domains over here, right?
if you close the drop down, right below the drop down, there is
I
a
have not.
hyper right there.
Okay. This is a marketing strategy. So
That's
if you
it.
don't have a domain name, please go to goretti.com and create a new domain. So how do you get a new domain?
Okay. It's just
Let's say, so if you don't have a custom domain, you have to go and purchase a custom domain, verify that domain.
but there is no other option except for adding that or inviting a guest user. That's it, right?
That's no other
Adding
option.
the domain. Okay. Yeah, it's on there.
If you want to add multiple users, then you can go ahead, create a CSV file, and you can do a bulk create or bulk invite.
Okay.
But great you asked that question. So any such question, please ask. Just give me a moment. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Any other questions? Because this is one of the most foundational aspects, Azure Active Directory. All your authentication will happen from here. Unless you have Azure Active Directory, you will not be able to log into your Azure environment. And in your exam, there will be a lot of scenarios. And in this given scenario, what is the kind of resource that you create? When will you go for conditional access? When do you go for identity risks or identity protection resources, user risk, sign-in risk? As far as the next module is concerned, next module is about the second type of identity, which is synchronized identity. Remember, I said there are three types of identities: cloud identity, the user that you directly create. Second is synchronized identity. So this module is about synchronized identity. So why would somebody go ahead and do a synchronization of identities? See, if you look at your existing organization, there will be large number of pre-existing users within the Active Directory of a given organization, right? Or uh, as a mid-sized organization, many of them would have already started off with on-premises Active Directory. They would not have gone to Azure Active Directory. So keeping that kind of requirements in mind, we would already have large number of pre-existing resources here, correct? So what one needs to do is we need to use a tool called as Azure AD Connect, which will synchronize these users, which will synchronize the attributes of these users onto Azure Active Directory. So in this module, what we're going to discuss about is the hybrid identity, the steps for installation and configuration of Azure AD Connect, right? And the third thing that we're going to discuss about is password sync, password write back. And finally, we'll discuss about Azure AD Connect Health, which is when you are synchronizing multiple users, how many users have been successfully synchronized, how many of them have a problem, all that information you'll get as part of your Azure AD Connect Health. Now, before I proceed further and discuss about these resources, let me start up a process over here of a virtual machine creation. Okay, so while this machine gets created, I will be able to discuss further details. And once I come back, I'll be able to work with this machine and show you the required steps over here. Windows Server 2019 Data Center, D2S V3. Okay, RDP ports, that is fine. Let me take this type as standard HDD. So I'll come to this section a bit later in terms of what is virtual machine, how does it work, and all those things. Right now, the focus is not virtual machines. Right now, the focus is showing you Active Directory synchronization. That's why I'm not getting into details of virtual machines. We'll come to this in a module which will be there in process going ahead. Here what we're going to discuss about is hybrid identity, installation and configuration of Azure AD Connect. What are the options over here? What if you are making any changes within Azure Active Directory, especially in terms of password, and you have to write it back to your on-premises environment? That is something called as password write back. So let's begin with hybrid identity. So once you look at hybrid identity, there are when you use the word hybrid basically means integration or communication between two environments. Okay, the two environments over here that you'll see is the first environment is your on-premises environment, and the second environment that you are seeing is the Azure environment. So any setup between these two members, that is what is referred as hybrid. Here you have three types of synchronization. One is password hash synchronization. The simple meaning over here is the hash value of your users that we have that gets synchronized with Azure Active Directory. Second is pass-through authentication, where you have an agent which is being installed on the client environment, client Active Directory. That is your pass-through authentication. Third one that you have over here is federation, which is a Active Directory federation services. So if you remember on day one, while I was discussing about services, I discussed about multiple options there, right? And one of them is ADFS. As far as ADDS is concerned, Active Directory domain services. So as part of your domain services, as the name suggests, this will be helping you for user creation, group creation, whatever domain you want to map over here, right? So those things will be part of your ADDS. As far as federation services is concerned, you want to set up a trust between domains over here, right? Now here, if you see, there are two domains. One is onmicrosoft.com, and the second domain will be your local domain, your on-premises domain. So you want to establish a trust between two domains. So you can use ADFS here. As far as rights management services is concerned, the focus over here is document protection, right? You have your ADLDS for backward compatibility. So if you have any non-Active Directory kind of environment and you want to associate with that, then you'll use ADLDS. Okay, this is one of the legacy services for integrating with other non-AD domains. So when you're talking about federation over here, this is ADFS. Okay, so once it comes to architecting, based on what is the scenario right now, you can make a choice over here. So whether you want to go for password hash synchronization, or you want to use pass-through authentication agent, or you want to use Active Directory federation services. So if you look at your Active Directory federation services, that will give you maximum number of options. So enabling on-premises multi-factor authentication solutions, or any of your radius integration. Remember we mentioned earlier, smart card authentication or RSA authentication, those things will require ADFS. Whereas generic scenarios that you see, any kind of single sign-on requirements or basic multi-factor, cloud-based multi-factor authentication solutions. So basic resources that you see, all of them get done or gets achieved by using pass-through authentication or password hash synchronization. Let me share a URL with you all. So all details that we are discussing right now in context of hybrid identity, what are the common scenarios, you'll be able to see here. Another reason why I'm sharing these links is based on whatever information I have locally available, right, in the presentation. That information is old information or stale information, because I don't go and verify these changes on day-to-day basis. Whereas if you look at these web links, this information is regularly being updated by Microsoft, right? So most of the recent details that you would want, all this information will be available here. Right? Your password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication agent, how to use that. right? So all these information, all these resources are available as part of your documentation. You can go through these steps. You can try creating these resources yourself as well. Once you have a Azure subscription, I don't think this should be an issue for you. Some of things I will show you as a demo over here, which is part of this course. I'm pretty sure all of you all have started reading up on the links which I have shared with you all, and I'm sharing on day-to-day basis. Because a lot of you all, as far as Chennai is concerned, he's already done AZ104. So some of these things he's already aware about. Other folks who are from AWS background or have not worked with Azure extensively earlier or are new to Azure, I would recommend please start reading it on the daily basis. At least 2 hours you'll have to dedicate on a daily basis. Let's go to the next section over here, which is installation and configuration of Azure AD Connect. Now, while I discuss this resource, let me do a prerequisite for this. And what is the prerequisite? The prerequisite over here would be going to my virtual machine, configuring the Azure Active Directory. Okay. Some of you all may have done it earlier. For many of them, it could be new. So let me go to my virtual machine here. So once the machine is created and you are inside the machine, it doesn't matter whether you are on AWS or whether you're on the Azure platform. This might take a moment to check for all the services which are available. Since I have to download a file and this IE enhanced security configuration stops me from downloading any files. So let me turn it off by going to IE enhanced security configuration. Let me turn it off. If I refresh it, this value right now is off. That's what I want. Let me go to add roles and features. Here, you'll see all the services which I have mentioned earlier. Active Directory certificate services, domain services, federation services, right? Lightweight directory services, rights management services. Out of this, let's select Active Directory domain services, because without having a domain, you'll not be able to install and configure Azure Active Directory Connect. So here if you see, it gives you an option. It says, Subhash, are you sure that you want to create a new Active Directory? Why don't you go and why don't you go and start using Azure Active Directory? We have already published it as a service. Let me go ahead, do the installation over here. Now this might take some time. This installation configuration of Azure Active Directory, this might take some time. Now, while this is happening, let me download the tool, which is Azure AD Connect. Because using this tool, sorry, because using this tool, we are going to synchronize all the users from our on-premises environment or from this Active Directory environment to our Azure Active Directory. Let me save this. I can install it later once I have configured my Active Directory domain services. So this part is being done. Let me do a switch directory over here. Now the reason why I'm doing this switch directory is, if you remember yesterday, we had premium license with one of the directories. So I'm going to that directory right now. Let me check the users available here. So you all will be able to see that I don't have Azure subscription. I don't have Azure subscription in this directory. But doesn't matter, because right now I'm working only with Active Directory. Now one more thing which I want you all to understand, which I already have done in this scenario or in this Active Directory. We need to have a user over here as a sync admin user. Okay, the name would be anything. The name doesn't matter. What matters over here is you need to have a user over here which is having the domain details. In my case, the name is adaptable 2003 on Microsoft.com. That's one. So there has to be a user with this domain. Hotmail user, Gmail user, it will not work over here. So you need, if you don't have a user, you need to go ahead and add a user here. That's one. Second aspect is this user has to be assigned the role of a global administrator. So here if you see, I have assigned the role as global administrator for this user. So two things, two important aspects over here. One is you need to create a new user, and it cannot be a guest user. It has to be a user of that same domain. So you see the previous user, OMS Pandey Hotmail, this will not work. I can either use AD user one or I can use sync admin user. Okay, which will help me synchronize the users from my on-premises Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. So I'm done with this. I have installed this role, Active Directory domain services. Let me promote this server as a domain controller. So as an infrastructure team or an administration team, this is what they do when they are setting up the environment for the first time. That is promoting a machine, whatever domain name you want to mention. As far as this domain is concerned, as far as this domain is concerned, this is our internal domain, right? So generally how organizations will work is they will already have purchased a global domain by using a domain service provider services. By going to GoDaddy.com or any other site, they would have already purchased their domain. Once they have purchased their domain, they will associate this domain in the Active Directory, right? Same domain, they will also register it inside the Azure Active Directory. So both of these domains have to be same, which is not true in my case. In my case, locally I have contoso.com, whereas here I have Adatum Lab 2003 on Microsoft.com, which is not the right scenario. So I will have to lose one of the domains. So what I will do is, once I synchronize it, I will show you the next steps over there as well. So once I come to that step, when I'm doing the synchronization, I will mention about that as well. So currently what I'm doing is I am configuring a Active Directory domain service. on my virtual machine to create a scenario that this is a on-premises Active Directory. Now, in case of your on-premises environment, where the users have been created, all the login operations are happening, these are certain things which are already there in place, because these things are going to happen before the first user gets created, the first user logs in into that environment. So some of these things we don't do it on day-to-day basis. This is done once and it will be used over and over again. So you'll be connecting to Active Directory through your applications. You'll be associating your printers, your devices, adding new number of organization units. All these things are part of your Active Directory. We are not getting deep into Active Directory because Active Directory itself is a certification course of 5 days. So you can imagine how many features you have within Active Directory. In our case, we are just using one service of it, which is Active Directory domain services. And we have got a domain created. We will create users and groups inside this domain. Okay. So whatever information is required for this environment, I'm providing you that details right now. If you all have any questions on any of these areas, please do ask.
So, Subhash, like one question, so we can assume because we are trying to synchronize users from the on-premises, so we can assume they already
Yes,
have AD and they already have all the users, whatever you are going to create,
absolutely.
right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
absolutely right.
So once you have all of those things, like maybe you will install like Active
Azure AD
Directory
Connect.
Connect,
Yes,
and that is going to synchronize with the portal.
absolutely right.
Okay.
So these are basically prerequisite steps that one needs to do before you go for a Azure Active Directory Connect installation and configuration. So as far as Azure AD Connect is concerned, I hope by now everybody is clear what is the purpose of Azure AD Connect. Though we may not have installed and configured as of now, but we know the purpose of it. So this will give you a GUI interface to help you connect from your on-premises Active Directory and synchronize this on Azure Active Directory. So any of your scenarios or any of the steps that you want to do, any kind of filters or conditions that you want to mention over here, all those things will be done using Azure AD Connect. There are three basic approaches over here, which I already mentioned. So first is password hash synchronization. So as the name suggests, the exact value of the password is not being saved on Azure Active Directory. The password value is being hashed and that hashed value is being stored. So whenever the customer tries to connect to that service, it will check whether the password hash and the value which is user has given, generate a hash value of that and compare both of it. Right? So if that value matches, only then the user will be allowed to log in. Otherwise, we'll give a message saying that the given value, the given password is invalid.
Is that similar to SSO?
Yes. So through
Okay.
that, it achieves SSO, single sign-on.
Okay.
SSO basically would mean that once that user is being registered, it will not ask the password for other applications, other subsequent applications. In the same session, if the user is launching other applications, it will verify that it is the same user. That is what is single sign-on. And that single sign-on is with your on-premises environment and with your Azure services as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, Subhash. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So any of your resources that you're accessing from your Azure environment. Now here, if you see very, very carefully, the third point, here it is saying the users, once the user has got that token, got that access token, user will be allowed to access Azure resources, Office 365, Active Directory domain services, right? Now, how does that happen? If you remember, Azure Active Directory is a common service across multiple other services, right? Azure Active Directory is a common service to your Office 365 environment, your Microsoft Intune, number of PaaS services, SaaS solutions, right? So once the user is registered over there successfully, user will be able to access all of the services. I will repeat myself. Azure Active Directory is not part of your Azure services. That's why even if I don't have a Azure subscription, I can still access Azure Active Directory. So are we clear with that? Anyone,
Yeah.
any confusion there? So here, if you see in the diagram, it's a separate service. It's an independent service which will help you to check your authentication authorization and help you connect to your services here. Right? So user productivity, help desk cost, something like self-service password reset, right? So those things you can do it easily. So that will help you reduce the help desk cost. Just give me a moment. Let me go back and verify. Okay, my machine has restarted, which is good, which means the installation is successful. I'll need to do a switch directory once again. So right now, what I'm trying to showcase is just one feature or one way of synchronization, which is password hash synchronization. This might take some time to connect. The reason why I'm saying that is we have just configured the Active Directory domain services. To get that domain ready, it might take some time. Right? So it is applying the group policy. Yeah. So finally, I'm ready. So I have Active Directory domain services being configured over here, DNS service being configured over here. Let me go to Active Directory users and computers. So if you see, I have a domain over here as contoso.com. Let me go to the users section. Let me add a new user. Let me give the name as AD user1, or let me give names as okay. User cannot change password. Password never expires. Something wrong here.
Hey Subhash, once you complete this exercise, can you put a outline the steps just for us to practice? Outline the steps like step one, step two, step three. What we doing?
No issues. I'll do that. So I can add a user over here. I can add a group over here. So whichever resources one might want to create. So I have a group over here. I also have a user over here. I can add as many number of users as I want. What's wrong with this? One password at the rate one. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, so I've added 2 users over here, and I've got my Active Directory domain services being configured. So I just showed you 2 users. There will be 2000 or many number of users over here, depending upon what are the organization units, what are the groups over here, department.
Can't hear Subhash.
Mentioning about the steps over here, creation of Active Directory virtual machine. So here if you see, so as part of your VM creation, we are done. We have gone ahead, install the Active Directory role, configure the Active Directory domain service, create a new domain name that we want, which is contoso.com. Then we went ahead for addition of users and groups over here. Now, once we're done with this, let's go to the next step over here, which is our Azure AD Connect tool. Here, what we are doing is as part of the machine, here we already have downloaded the resource and it should be available in the downloads folder. Let's go and install this. Along with this, we'll also configure this resource over here. Now, while you are configuring Azure AD Connect, there are two resources that one needs to mention. One is the sync admin. Remember the global admin resource that we had created? That's one, which will help us to connect with your Azure Active Directory. And second is you need to mention the administrator account of your domain. So as far as domain administrator is concerned, the domain administrator right now is myself. Okay. So let me go ahead, specify the username and password over here. What is the username for this? So for username, I'll have to go back to the directory over here, which is adaptable. Within that, I have my sync admin user. Right. So this is the user which I want to use for my association with Azure Active Directory. Let me specify the password here. Let me do a reset password because I don't remember the passwords for sync admin.
Hey, Subhash, a sideline question to you.
Yeah.
I know you can create a Windows desktop on Azure. So it has to be a packaged deal, 510 or something, or can we have one of them also, single desktop on Azure?
Are you talking about WVD?
Yeah. Can we get one? Can we create one for ourselves for just to play around?
I have not worked with WVD extensively, but as far as WVD is concerned, WVD basically is a pool of machines. So if you have a lot of users who are working with machines at different point in time, in those scenarios, it will make sense for you. Where everybody is using those resources at the same time. In that case, it doesn't make sense. What I would recommend is if you all can create your own Azure subscription, a free trial account, and each of you all can connect to that. That will help you to do the required hands-on.
No, I'm just curious, directly we'll work on, I will dump my desktop and try to use WVD just for some testing, like how it works and that kind of stuff.
So in your Azure environment, you can create your WVD as a service and you can use that. No problem.
But it looks like it's 100 is the minimum, I think, something like that.
Sorry?
Looks like 100 is the minimum. 100 is the minimum version.
I'll have to check for that. How many minimum users you require over there? I'm not sure if it requires only 100. You can create it for less number of them as well. It may not be available from the browser or the portal, but from your scripts, you can do that.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of things which are configurable, not using the portal, but by using your scripts, you can do that.
PowerShell, JSON.
Yes, PowerShell scripts or CLI scripts, you should be able to do that. So I have reset the password. I am signing in with the same password here. Just change the process over here. So it is asking for authenticator app. Okay, so two steps required over here. Step one is creation of your user. Second is specifying the password for that user. So I've already registered with that. I have updated the password as well. Second thing that is asking for is specify the local username. So once it comes to your environment here, you don't have a administrator as an account, right? Here, the user that you have logged in as, that user will become the administrator account. So you have to mention your domain name over here, followed by your name which you have used as for login. Let's mention the password here. Now this is a very, very important section. So here it says, Subhash, there is a confusion here. I have two domains. The domain which you have on the Azure environment is on Microsoft.com domain, whereas the domain that you have locally available, it is some other domain, which is contoso.com. They are not same. So you need to go ahead and specify a UPN suffix within your local Azure local directory, local Active Directory that you have, right? So you'll have to make that change over here as a UPN suffix. Second is go to your Azure environment. There also use the same domain, right? So once both these domains are matched, and you need to make sure it is a verified domain. Okay, you need to make sure that that is also a verified domain on Azure. So once that is being done, I will be able to synchronize these users effectively with the same domain name. So on premises, if you are login by using subhash@cloudfront.com, right? Same thing, you can do it on Azure as well. Okay, so that's how it should happen in real world scenarios. But for that, we need to purchase a custom domain. We need to add that domain within your custom domain section of Azure Active Directory, right? In our case, we don't have that option because I don't have a custom domain being purchased. So what I'm saying is continue without matching the UPN suffixes. Even if that domain is not mapping, no issues. Let's go ahead, click on install. And when you do install, this is what are the steps it is going to do. Installation of the synchronization engine, Azure configuration of Azure AD connector, right? Enabling your password hash synchronization, right? So all these things are happening behind the scene. Now here, if you see, there could be large number of users. So first, what it does it installs local database for SQL Server to keep a track of how many users have been synchronized successfully, how many users have not been synchronized, which are the properties that has been synchronized, which properties has not been synchronized. So for all of these members, you have respective steps over here. Okay, so this might take some time to configure and seeing our users appearing in the list over here. Okay, so while that happens, let us proceed further. Authentication using pass-through authentication agent. So is everyone clear with this? Any questions here in terms of pass-through authentication agent? Okay, so what we have done right now is we have used something called as express settings. You can also do something called as custom settings. So in terms of custom settings, you can specify which are the users that I want to synchronize, which are the groups I want to synchronize. So based on certain attributes of the users, you can specify those attributes over here. So using these attributes or using these conditions, I can go ahead and specify these resources or work with these members over here. So you can, like I was discussing with Chinna, in terms of on PowerShell resources. So you have a PowerShell module over here called as Azure AD Sync. So you can use that, or you can use something called as Azure AD Connect. Right. So these are some of the resources which are AD Sync basically is a module on PowerShell, which was the older version. So you have DAR Sync, you have Azure AD Sync, and the latest one that you have is Azure AD Connect, and the version is 3.0. Right. So you can use any one of the latest modules of latest members of Azure AD Connect, and you can work with it. So if you look at the features, some of the features already I have mentioned about, that is filtering, your password hash synchronization, your password write back. These are set of changes that one can select over here when you are going for the custom settings. Now this will help you to prevent any kind of accidental deletes. How will that happen? Because you have a SQL database where all this information is getting stored. That which information is getting written on Azure Active Directory, what are the steps that we have within our local environment. If you look at your single sign-on, so based on your current scenario, when you are developing a new application, you can directly register that within your Azure Active Directory, and you can start using OpenID Connect and OAuth. If you have an older application, you can configure singles, and you want to configure single sign-on. You want to associate that with your identities which are there in your on-premises environment. In those scenarios, you should go for synchronization, right? If there is an application already set up with SSO with another member, right? In those scenarios, you have to link that member, link that resource with your existing Azure Active Directory. So here you'll see, based on what is the current scenario right now, based on what is the current status of your application, right? You can make a decision and you can associate this with your on-premises environment. You can associate this with your cloud Active Directory, cloud service of Active Directory, which is Azure Active Directory. Now, what this will help you do is, this will help you to ensure that whenever a user is accessing that application, you are able to route it to the right source, get the respective details from there, and allow the user to access that application using appropriate permissions. So in the current scenario, if you see, we have created a new user over here, right? Chinna as a user, Guru as a user, right? Now these users would have already synchronized over here once this process is complete. Can you see this? So I have two users which are synchronized from my on-premises environment. And if you see the property over here, directory synced, right? So both of them are showing as yes. What happened to the group that we had created? If I go to the groups section, here I have a new group, which is AD group. Are you able to see this? Like Chinna rightly mentioned, which I agree to him, that some of these things you should do it as a hands-on within your subscription. So you can take a free trial, create these resources, but please be careful. Once you are done with this, make sure you delete the virtual machine, right? Or stop the virtual machine, because the time for which it is running, you will be charged for it, right? So you can go through the video. I have showcased all the steps over here. So it should be easy for you all to redo these steps, perform these actions that I have shown over here. So while this synchronization was happening, I was also discussing about number of features of Azure AD Connect. Let me show that to you all. I'm not sure if this is the right password, which has got copied. So here, if you see, it says if there are a number of subdirectories over here, if there are a number of subdirectories within this, I can connect to that. Along with that, I can also help you do a domain filtering or organization units filtering. So here, if you have multiple selected OUs, right, I can pick up only those members and I can synchronize that. So I may deselect all these members, just select the users section. I want to synchronize only the users section. Can you see this? There's an option over here of password hash synchronization, which I already have done. Second is you have an option of password write back. What is this write back? If there are any changes being done on the user password within Azure Active Directory, I want to update this password here in my on-premises environment. Are we getting it? Is everyone clear with this? Password write back feature?
Can you repeat that please one more time?
So I was saying, when you check on this checkbox as password write back, which means if user has to change the password, they don't have to come to Azure, they don't have to come to local Active Directory, they can change it directly from Azure. And once they update this from the Azure environment, it will automatically modify the password within your local Active Directory. That is the
Okay.
feature of password write back.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
So it's not enabled by default. You'll have to go ahead and enable it by going to the optional feature. You have to go and enable this password write back. Now I have a question for you all. Let me see who's actively listening and understanding it. How will the user get this permission to change the password on Azure Active Directory? Which feature will help the user? And we have discussed this in the yesterday's session.
What was the question again? Like I want to understand
What
the
is the
question.
feature? What is the feature of Azure Active Directory which will allow the user to modify his or her password?
Self
Very good.
some self password, like something was there with the self name actually.
Very close. Very close. Anybody else who can help him? So he has mentioned the first word. So there are 3 more words remaining.
Self-service password, something like that.
Yes. Self-service password reset.
Right.
So using that self-service password reset feature, user can modify his or her password on the Azure environment, and that will get synchronized over here within your on-premises environment once you have enabled password write back.
Yes, sir. I was in mute. Sorry. Actually, we use this self-service password a lot, guys. Especially, I want to give the example. We have a lot of users, right? A lot of users and the students when they log in. We have AD Connect. Most of the time, what happens is like they come as a guest user and they forget the users and the password. And this, we have a self-service feature that we enable it in PeopleSoft, and when they click it, they get an option to reset the password by themselves.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah, actually, when Guru was mentioning that, it did not strike me. Then when he said self, then
Okay. But believe me, guys, this is a very, very important resource because most of the help desk tickets that is being raised is actually for this. I don't remember my password. So can you reset my password? Okay. So this is what we have done right now. We have checked for prerequisites. We have enabled Azure AD Connect, and we have done single sign-on over here. So how do you verify single sign-on? Till now we have configured everything, but we have not verified single sign-on. To verify single sign-on, I'll have to log in as Chinna. I have to log in as Guru. Only then I will be able to verify that my users have been synchronized correctly, and also I'm able to log in using that user. Okay, so let me go back to the users section where I have these synchronized users. So what should be the password over here? The password should be same what I have mentioned within my on-premises environment. Okay, the password should be same because here we are using password hash synchronization. So once the hash value is being matched, I should be able to log in successfully over here. So how do I verify if I have been able to log in? I'm able to access the portal. I'm able to access the Active Directory. I'm able to see other user information over here. Clear, everyone? So we have done the synchronization correctly, and we have also verified the single sign-on. So what I have done right now is I have done password synchronization, and I have also showed you the feature of self-service password reset yesterday itself. So I'm not repeating that. I'll skip this section. So as far as the user is concerned, I can log in as a test user, like Chena rightly said. So the users can go ahead, update their password, whatever features you want for password reset. You can ask relevant questions to them, right? You can ask for a multi-factor authentication as well before the user goes and modifies or updates his or her password. Now, very important aspect is whenever you have synchronized users, it should not happen that I have a different password in Azure environment and I have a different password in my on-premises environment. Correct? That will create confusion. So for that to happen smoothly, we'll need to make sure we have enabled self-service password reset, and also we have enabled a write back feature. Right? So whenever you have a write back feature, what will happen is any changes you make on Azure, if you modify the password or if the user has done a password reset, the same password will also be updated within the on-premises environment. And for this, you don't have to open any kind of firewall rules or firewall policies over here. All this is taken care by the services which are running behind the scene with your Azure AD Connect. Now moving ahead with the next important member, which is Azure AD Connect. Now what is this Azure AD Connect? So in the starting of this module itself, I had mentioned about knowing how many users have been synchronized, how many user attributes have been synchronized, is there any problem with it, right? So all that information I'll get as part of Azure AD Connect Health. So while you are doing the synchronization option, right? So it checks for all the alerts, all the processes happening behind the scene. So if you want to check which attributes have been missed out, or if there is any issues in terms of ADFS association between the Azure Active Directory and your on-premises environment, right? Like I said earlier, there may be 5,000, 6,000 users. It's not about 2 or 3 users. So in those cases, it becomes important because at times some of these processes can work for more than 24 hours. Depending upon how many number of users you have, how many attributes or properties you have per user, right? It may take good amount of time. So you want to see all these processes happening, see what is the metrics, anywhere anything is missed out, you can verify those things. Based on my experience, there are a lot of cases where say around 80% of synchronization is being done. 20% synchronization, there is a problem. So how do you dig out which users have not been synchronized, which user attributes have not been synchronized? So all that information you'll get as part of your Azure AD Connect Health. Rather than talking about it, let me see if I can show that tool to you all. So here, if you go to your search section, you have Azure AD Connect Health. If you see the members over here, any kind of sync errors, duplicate attributes, federated domain concerns or challenges over here, existing admin roles that you have. So all this information you'll be able to see over here. So if you have used ADFS services and any issues in that context, that will come in this section. So right now I don't have any issues. I don't have any problems with my system. The configuration has been done successfully. That's why I'm not seeing too much of information here. Okay. So depending upon right now in my scenario, I have a single user called a sync admin. So if you want to create other users as well and give them permissions that these users will be able to access the Active Directory Connect Health. So we want to delegate these tasks or delegate these responsibilities to different users. So those things we can do over here by adding a new user or adding a existing user, giving that user respective permissions on this section, which is Azure Active Directory Connect Health. Some of these troubleshooting or issues you can resolve at your end. If it is beyond your control, you can raise a support ticket with Microsoft saying that these are the issues which we are facing as far as our Azure Active Directory is concerned. You also can create an agent, download the agent over here for ADFS or download Health Connect agent on your on-premises environment where you have your ADDS created. So it can push information or push contents or any issues. It can push that information to your Health Connect over here. So this is more in terms of simplifying and smoothing the communication, smoothing the processes that we have within our Azure Active Directory environment and your on-premises Active Directory. Now, by doing these steps that we have discussed till now, what we have ensured is we have got all three types of identities ready with us. One is cloud identity, second is synchronized identity, and the third one is guest identity. I have also showed you implementations for how to create a virtual machine, how to create Active Directory domain services over here, create some users within your local environment, synchronize those users with your Azure Active Directory. Also, how you can do filtering if you have multiple groups, large number of users segregated across the groups, right? How you can make use of password write back and self-service password reset. Anyone, any questions still here in module 2?
Subhash, will you be providing this for the VM? Like what kind of VM we need to we can create, and like the pricing is also an issue for that, right? So how and which one to create, something like that. Can you give us more information on that? Because I mean, while creating the VM, you went in a little fast. I couldn't get those steps, but I just wanted to check.
You can go through the recording for that, but I will still mention that value. For Active Directory domain services, you don't need a large machine. You can go for a very, very basic machine like 2-core 8 GB RAM is good enough. In my case, I have taken D2 as V3 machine. You all can also use D2 V2 machine. Please be careful. Once your job is done, don't forget to stop the machine or delete the machine.
Okay.
We will come to virtual machines in detail a bit later. That's why I just sped up with that. Virtual
Okay.
machine as a topic is a separate topic itself. Right
Yeah,
now,
that's
the focus was not virtual machines. The focus was Azure AD Connect. Because if I go to each and every tab within the VM creation, that itself takes around 2 hours.
yeah, got it.
So I'll come to that section separately. Right now, the focus was how do I quickly create Active Directory domain services, configure ADDS, add users, configure Azure AD Connect, and help you all with how to do the synchronization. That's why I went fast with that section.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
So let's proceed further. Let's go to the next module here. Now, once you have privileges on your Azure Active Directory, right? The next step that one should do is we should create a Azure subscription, because moving ahead from here, you will not be able to do any of these activities, or you will not be able to try out this without a valid Azure subscription. Okay. So once you have identity, which means now you can associate your subscription with a respective tenant. Now in this section, this is about networking. Let me go back a step. And once you look at cloud computing, there are 3 primary entities for cloud computing. As part of cloud computing, you have options for creating infinite compute, bottomless storage, and seamless networking. These are 3 very, very important aspects of cloud computing, right? So first thing that we are starting up over here is with your networking resources. So as part of your networking, what we're going to discuss about is virtual networks. We are going to discuss about virtual network peering, and what are the options given by Microsoft Azure for networking resources. Now the question here that everyone should have is, why should we go for virtual networking? The reason being, we are not dealing with physical environments over here. We're not dealing with physical machines here. So your data cable crimping, or having a rack server over here, or a switch through which you want to connect to it. So those things are not available here. What we have over here is a virtualized environment, virtualized platform given by the cloud provider, and we are implementing virtual networking over here. As a core concept of networking, I'm sure everybody is aware about it. This will help us to create any kind of complex workloads or any kind of infrastructure as a solution or platform as a service. Now, I'm not sure who was mentioned about AWS. So even people from AWS background, you also have something called as VPC over there. Am I right?
Yes, yes.
So similar to VPC, what you have over here is virtual networking. Okay, so within this virtual network, you can create your resources. So you can create your components within that virtual network. I'm not sure on this, but as far as AWS is concerned, VPC is a compulsory aspect. Whereas once it comes to Azure, you may want to keep your PaaS services or PaaS resources within a virtual network, or you may keep it outside. That's your choice. Virtual network is not compulsory for PaaS services, platform as a service, but it is compulsory for infrastructure as services. Because whenever you are creating any virtual machine, that needs to have a private IP address. Correct? That needs to have a private IP address. Now that private IP address will come from a network that you are creating. So within virtual network, just give me a moment. Okay, so within virtual network, so first thing that you do is you specify your address space. Now, when I say address space, you can use IPv4 addresses or you can use IPv6 addresses, depending upon how large the range that you'd want. Okay, so the first aspect over here is specifying your address space. You can make use of class A, class B kind of IPs that you would want, right? That would be your step one. Second step over here would be within that virtual network, you create multiple subnets. So break it up into smaller sections. That is your subnets over here, right? Now, while you are creating a virtual network, you will have to associate a region, in which region you want to create your virtual network. And this will be part of a specific service, a specific subscription. So now you'll see in earlier slides, nowhere we mentioned about subscription, correct? Here you see it mentions about subscription. So you'll have to mention your resource group. You have to mention your subscription over here, subscription information. Just give me a moment. Let me add a new page over here. So if you're looking at virtual networking, as part of virtual networking, okay, so whatever name you want to mention to this virtual network, whatever region you want to mention over here, right? Whatever resource group you want to mention over here for your virtual network, right? So all these things will be over here. Along with this, you also need to mention address space 10.0.0.0/60. So this is the range that I am mentioning over here of IP addresses. So it can be /16, or it can be, what is the minimum range over here? You can use something like /29. /29 will give you 8 IP addresses, right? So as you keep reducing this number, right, you will keep increasing the range, right? So /28 will give you 16 IP addresses. If you look at /27, this will give you 16 into 2. If you go for /24, this will give you 256 IP addresses, right? So depending upon what is the number of IP addresses that you would want, and how would I decide that? How many machines do I want? So depending upon number of virtual machines I want to create, I will create a range accordingly. Okay. If you go for /16, this will give you more than 65,000 IP addresses. Now inside this virtual network, I can go ahead and create number of subnets over here. So how many subnets I want? Now each of these subnets which I'm creating, again will have a specific range for themselves. So this is the outermost range. Inside that, I'll have an inner range. Say, let me give it name as web subnet. DB subnet. Okay. So you decide what is the subnet that you would want, right? Web subnet, DB subnet. And here inside this, I can mention whatever range I want, say 10.0.0.0/24. Okay, so within /16, which is the larger range, I can have a smaller range over here. Similarly, 10.0.1.0/24. So I can create specific ranges over here within my virtual network. Okay, I hope this makes sense to you all. In terms of, if you see the best practices, right? So I hope this part is clear in terms of address space, subnets. If you look at best practices over here, the first is overlapping address spaces. Now, what is this address space? Address space basically is helping you to refer a particular machine, correct? It is helping you refer a particular machine. Whereas if you have an overlapping IP address, what do I mean by that? I can have two machines with same IP address, right? If you know, these IP addresses are behaving as a unique identifier for your machine. Now, just by saying that, I have already told you what is the problem that can occur if you have an overlapping IP address, which means two machines have a same IP address. So when I want to connect to that, how would I know if it is connecting to the first machine or a second machine? Getting it? So that could become a major issue whenever you have a overlapping address space. That's why the best practice says ensure there is no overlapping address spaces. So each machine should be uniquely identifiable, right? So even in this batch, which we are having, if two people have the same name, what will happen? So either I have to use their surnames or pet names or some other way to make sure to distinguish between both these people. Otherwise, if I ask a question, both of them will start responding back. Same thing holds true for these machines as well. Second thing is you see is don't cover the entire VNet address space, because once it comes to your address spaces, you will require additional members over here. You will require additional members over here for Bastion service. You will require additional members for configuring your gateway. Now, what is this gateway? What is Bastion service? I will come to each of these things whenever we have this required points. Okay, whenever the topic comes, we'll discuss it over there. Gateway we will discuss very soon because we are already in the network area, right? So for gateway, you require a specific address space. So don't consume everything, or else you will have to expand it further. You have to expand that address space going ahead, right? So you have to be careful of that. Now, next thing that you see is, next point, configure a few larger VNets. That's what I have done. So instead of using a small VNet of 256 IP addresses, I have taken an IP address range over here, that is 16, which, like I said, gives you 65,000 IPs, right? I may be using only two of them right now, which is of size 256, which is fine. So take a larger one, and within that you can create multiple subnets. The last point is to ensure the right kind of communications are happening. We'll have to make sure we need a NSG over here. That is Network Security Group. Now, what is NSG? I will come to this in much more detail in tomorrow's session. Today, what I want to do is, I want you all to give an assignment. So your assignment over here, is step 1, create a Azure free trial subscription. If you all don't have one, That will be your step 1. As far as step 2 is concerned, create a resource group. Okay, create a resource group and give it a name as network RG, network resource group. Within that resource group, create a virtual network. Okay, within resource group, create a virtual network. Whatever name you want to give, it's up to you. Whatever region you want to select is up to you. The address space I have already mentioned over here, 10.0.0.0/16, and create 2 subnets inside this. Names also I have mentioned over here, and the ranges also I have mentioned over here. So you can take a screenshot of this. Okay, so we'll stop with this for today.